Taylor Swift is a global phenomenon in the realm of music. She has over 250 million certified equivalent sales since her first commercial album in 2006, and her influence in the pop and country genre is undeniable, and her fans are extremely loyal. It could be argued that she's one of the most influential figures in music that came out of the 21st century. Artists like Taylor Swift who reach this type of success have absurd amounts of money surrounding them. This money is fought over viciously between all parties involved because everybody wants their piece of the pie. There are potentially tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars to be made through album sales, streams, merchandise, touring, and royalties from their songs being used. This is where we arrive at one of the biggest problems for artists in the music industry. Artists not owning the rights to their studio recordings, also known as masters. Taylor Swift dealt with this exact problem 4 years ago in an extremely publicized battle with her old record label, Big Machine, for the rights to these masters. This would be the event that led her to decide to re-record all of her albums so that she could own her own music. Let's investigate why owning your masters is so important and how Taylor Swift found herself in this miserable situation. A studio recording, also known as a master, is the original recording of a song normally kept as a digital file. There are a couple of different reasons why owning the rights to this specific recording is very important for an artist. First, whoever owns the master of a specific song has the rights to license it in whatever way they choose. Second, whoever owns the master gets to collect all of the royalties associated with those licenses. Most of the time, it's the label who owns the master to an artist's song, and therefore they collect all of the royalties as well as having control of where, when, and how it's licensed. This is where the majority of the money is when it comes to collecting royalties on a song or album, and why most artists who sign big deals like this feel frustrated or used when they realize how little money they're actually making from their own work. Oftentimes, labels will even own the rights to an artist's masters in perpetuity, meaning the artist will never see any of those royalties or have any control over where their recordings are played for their entire lifetime. There's heated debate over whether or not it's fair for labels to retain control of the masters. Because the label invests in their artists by providing them with professional recording engineers and a world-class studio space to record their songs in, they argue that offering those services warrants them owning the recordings. This is the sad reality that most artists find themselves in, and it would be the catalyst for the biggest fight between an artist and a label in the music space. First, we need some context as to who Taylor Swift is and where she started. She began much like many artists do, with an interest in music from a young age, performing at local events trying to find her sound. At the age of 13, she began an artist development deal with RCA Records in Nashville, Tennessee, but quickly realized how awful most record labels were towards their talent and left the development deal in fear of being shelved by the label. She continued forming connections while in Nashville, and only a couple years later, she would be noticed by a DreamWorks Records executive named Scott Borchetta while performing. This is the exact moment that many up-and-coming artists find themselves in, finally recognized for their talent at writing and singing when a powerful executive notices them and gives them a shot at superstardom. However, what artists don't realize is that this chance comes with many strings attached. One of those strings usually ends up being a label having complete control of all their masters while under contract. It was here in 2005 when Taylor Swift signed a massive 13-year deal with Big Machine that gave the label full ownership of the masters to the first 6 albums she recorded, while Taylor got a large cash advance in exchange. A cash advance in the context of a record deal normally means that the artist will receive a lump sum of money from the label as a loan. Once they pay back this loan through record sales, only then will the artist start getting royalties from their songs. She would go on to release 6 extremely successful commercial albums, all of which reached platinum certification from RIA multiple times over. Her 2008 album Fearless would even go on to be diamond, which means the album sold over 10 million copies or equivalent sales including streams. Needless to say, the record label profited immensely from all 6 albums. In fact, 80% of all revenue for Big Machine Records came from her catalog of music alone. On the other end of things, it's been reported that Taylor Swift's royalty cut was somewhere around 10 to 15%. This figure has been disputed, so we can only point to it as an approximation. However, it's unfortunately all too common for even large artists to have terrible royalty splits like this, so we can probably assume this is somewhat close to what she received. Traveling forward to 2018, Taylor is a global superstar with more hits than you can count on two hands. Nearing the end of the year, her deal with Big Machine would come to a close, and the dispute between her and the label would unfold. Now that her contract was up, Taylor Swift's team proposed to her ex-label that she buy back all of her masters. Big Machine, being the morally dubious company they are, refused to sell them to her unless she agreed to continue making albums under their label for the next decade. She wisely refused, and they never reached an agreement on the sale of the masters, so they continued to be owned by Big Machine. Shortly after, she signed to a new label in New York called Republic Records and used her leverage and knowledge from her previous decade in the music industry to negotiate a much more favorable contract. This deal was a landmark moment for the entire music industry for two reasons. Firstly, she secured the rights to both her masters and publishing for any album that she created under Republic Records with a 50-50 royalty split, which is exceedingly rare. Second, she negotiated a deal for all artists under Republic Records if they wanted her to sign with their label. The deal stated that any sale of Republic Records shares in Spotify would result in every single artist under Republic Records receiving non-recoupable payments, which means the label cannot take that money back. Unfortunately, the high would only last so long because in 2019, Big Machine Records and all of its assets would be sold for over $300 million, including Taylor Swift's extremely lucrative masters. Ithaca Holdings, owned by Scooter Braun, was the buyer, and the purchase was funded by multiple venture capitalist firms who all had a stake in Ithaca Holdings. Not only was she frustrated by the sale, but what was more important was who it was sold to. Scooter Braun is one of the most successful record executives in the entire industry, managing huge names like Ariana Grande, Justin Bieber, and Martin Garrix. However, he's been in his fair share of controversies over his decade-long career in management. Taylor Swift has personally claimed that he's a manipulative bully and had a close relationship with Kanye West, who had previously feuded with Taylor Swift. He's also been accused of pushing Ariana Grande to perform live directly after a took place at one of her concerts in Manchester, England. There are plenty of other stories and rumors that circulate online about him, some of which can't ever truly be verified, but there's certainly some shady stuff surrounding him. One final thing happened in 2019, which was the straw that broke the camel's back for Taylor Swift. She claims that Braun and Big Machine Records attempted to prevent her from playing any of her old material at the American Music Awards in 2019. She also claimed Borchetta's team said that she could perform her old material as long as she agreed to not re-record new versions of her old songs. After a public fight over these claims, Big Machine Records eventually released a statement saying they would grant all artists licenses to perform at the AMAs and rebroadcasts of it afterwards, but left Taylor Swift's name out of the statement. All of these previous events led her to the decision to re-record her 6 previous albums, becoming one of the most famous pop culture events in recent history.
To you, and you've also said that you're planning on re-recording some of your music. Is that true? Wait a minute. Are you going to do that?
Yeah, that's true, and it's something that I'm very excited about doing because my contract says that starting November 2020, so next year, I can record albums 1 through 5 all over again.
Luckily for her, she was able to do this because she'd retained the publishing rights to all 6 albums, so her previous label could do nothing to stop her because she owned the underlying intellectual property. To add fuel to the fire, Taylor Swift made one last attempt in 2020 to buy back her original masters from Scooter Braun. He said yes under one condition, that she sign an absurdly restrictive NDA which stated that if Taylor Swift were to talk about Scooter Braun during the buying process, she could only say positive things. Needless to say, she refused and never looked back. She went on to re-record Fearless and Red during 2021 and released them to critical acclaim and massive support from her fans. Both albums broke numerous records, and the song All Too Well, Taylor's version, became her 8th #1 Billboard charting song. A year later in 2022, Scooter Braun did an interview in which he stated he regretted the way he handled the situation and came from a place of arrogance.
I know in 2019, when you bought the rights to Taylor Swift's Masters, it turned into a really big thing, right? But I'm just curious, if you can go back in time, Scott, would you have done it differently? Would you have handled it differently?
Yes, I would have.
It's pretty telling that only after his investment into her old masters became devalued and her re-recordings did end up coming out that he started to walk back everything he'd previously said. This story is a lot of things, but most importantly, it's a story about how a corrupt industry systematically strips artists of their control and money in an endless cycle, churning out new artists every year to profit from. The dispute between Taylor Swift and her label was one of the most publicized events in music history, and is probably one of the most important stories to come out of the music industry in the 21st century. It drew reactions from hundreds of celebrities and even sparked political discussion about the predatory practices of massive private equity firms. Taylor Swift undoubtedly changed the music industry for the better and did a tremendous service to many artists to come so that they do not end up in the same situation that she was in the past. Thank you guys for watching, stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video.